Hi, I am Tatiane Tereza, and this is Tempo de História, Time of History in English, and Tempo de História is a podcast that talks about historical facts in a simple way. But first of all, you have already noticed my Brazilian accent. So for those who don't know me, I am a teacher of history from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And some foreign friends complained that all my podcasts were in Portuguese only, and they encouraged me to do them in English as well. So here I am. But I want to apologize for the mistakes during the audio because my English isn't that good. Anyway, let's go. Today, Tempo de História is about the history. We are going to think a little bit about the concept of history and about history as that subject that we learn at school. And when we talk about history, we are talking about a science. You know that history is not story. The difference makes more sense in English than in Portuguese. In English, the sound, the pronunciation is quite different. In Portuguese, it's the same pronunciation. We only write them differently. História, history, is written with H, and História, story, is written with E, but the sound is quite similar. História e história. Based on that, you may ask, what history? When we talk about history as a subject that we study at school, history is a science which studies the human beings and studies the human relationships, the human interactions through the time. And based on that statement, we can think about some questions like, why does history is considered as a science? Or what is the main object of study of history? The main object of history is the humanity. So history is part of the so-called human sciences. Because of that, history doesn't study dinosaurs, for example. And there is that joke that asks, why do not dinosaurs eat human meat? Well, dinosaurs and human beings didn't exist in the same age. So history, as an object that we learn at school, talks about the human beings. It starts to tell the trajectory of human beings in this planet from the first hominid. The study of history helps us to think where we came from and who we are and the reasons of the existence of certain things, and it helps us to think that if we learn with the past, we can build our present and we can plan our future better. And who does make the history? Well, who studies and writes the history is the historian. And if history is a science, so the historian is a scientist who writes the history, analyzing the past, creating interpretations about that past. But if history is a science, historian must prove his historical theories. The historian cannot simply create a story about past and says that history is true. He must have historical sources to prove what he says. And what are those documents which prove the history? What are those historical sources? Well, the historical sources can come in different formats. They can be texts like letters, books, newspapers, magazines, They can be images like paintings, photographs. They can be sounds like testimonials recorded in audios, songs, and they can also be objects in general like utensils or ornaments, among other formats. It's interesting we think if history studies the human relationships through the time, so it means that time is an extremely important element to the study of history, and the time count is also important for the study of history. We have several types of time countings. We can count the time like a day, months, years, quinquennia, which is 5 years, decade, 10 years, century, 100 years, millennium, 1000 years, and we have also the calendars. And there are also several types of calendars. You may have already heard about Mayan calendar, Chinese calendar, but the most used calendar for the study of history is the Christian calendar, which has the birth of Jesus Christ as a starting point. So all years after Christ's birth are counting in ascending order, and the years before Christ's birth in a descending order. And before Christ's birth, we have to use the initials BC, which means before Christ, with the year. And another interesting thing is how history is divided. One of the most used division of history is that one that divides 5 aids, which start and end based on a historical mark. That is, a very important historical event because that event finishes a cycle. It is a watershed as long as what came before and after that historical mark are different. So that 5 aids are prehistory, ancient age, middle age, modern age, and contemporary age. Prehistory is the first age. First of all, prehistory is a mistaken term because for a very long time in past, it was believed that history couldn't be made without writing. But today, we all know that it was a huge mistake because we can count on other science like paleontology and archaeology to help the historians to write the history of people without writing. So some historians prefer to use the term age of history without writing, instead of prehistory. And you may ask when those ages start and end. Well, the prehistory starts around 100,000 years BC, when the first hominid appeared, and it ends with the emergence of the writing. Ancient age starts around 4000 BC, and it ends in the year 476 in the 5th century, which is the mark of the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Middle Age starts in 476 and it ends in the year 1453 when the Turks took over Constantinople. In the 15th century, the modern age starts in the 1453 and it ends in the 1789. In the 18th century, when the French Revolution started, it was the moment when the Bastille was taken over. And the contemporary age starts with the French Revolution, which is the age that we live today. Why? Because since 1789, we have never had an historical event that was a mark of a huge change in the mentality, in the social organization. We still heirs of what French Revolution inaugurated. So, that was Tempo de História. Follow me here in YouTube, in Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. See you soon!